Hello and welcome, Woodrow Wilson friends, family, and students. This is Miss Fields here, and I'm joining you tonight for our 23rd episode of Math Toolbox. Tonight we're going to be focusing on a skill that kind of compiles everything that we've learned about line plots. So not only are we going to be expected to identify and recognize the different parts of a line plot and the data points, but we're going to need to actually apply that knowledge to interpret the data and solve a problem. Now, when our fifth graders encounter some kind of problem with a line plot, it's going to look something like this. And we've visited these kinds of problems in class before, so this should look familiar. The problem states, the line plot below shows the distance students live from the school in miles. What is the difference in miles between the students who live closest and furthest away? So one thing immediately that I want to note with our line plot is that it is a continuous line. Also, that often in line plots, the person who wrote the problem wants to challenge our mathematician to identify fractional lengths in between whole numbers. Now, we've talked about this in class. Line plots aren't only going to be whole numbers, they're also going to ask you to interpret fractional lengths. And so one thing that we talked about in our class is that we start with the whole, so we'll start with 5. And then you count up how many cuts there are in between the next whole number. So let's start. Starting at 5, this is our 0. We've got 1, 2, 3 cuts. And in order to get our whole number, we have 4 cuts. So if we've got 4 cuts, we know that our numbers are going to be split into fourths. So starting with 5, we've got 5 and 1/4. 5 and 2/4, which is equivalent to 5 1/2, 5 and 3/4, and then we would have 5 and 4/4. But we know 4/4 is a whole, 5 plus 1 is 6. And starting there, we have each of our fractional lengths labeled. Same over here with in between our 6 and our 7. Because this is split into fourths, we know that this is 6 1/4, 6 1/2, and 6 3/4. Again, some of you guys, you're thinking, wait, Miss Fields, you said fourths. 6 1/2 is not fourths. If you were to write this as 6 2/4, 6 2/4 is equivalent to 6 1/2. Now going back to the problem, we labeled all of our fractional lengths. The question was, what is the difference means subtraction, between the furthest distance and the closest distance. So by furthest and closest, it means farthest away, which is 6 3/4 miles, and closest, which is exactly 5. Now, because even though this is a line plot, I'm still going to be using Foursquare to organize my work. I know the farthest distance away was 6 3/4. I know the closest distance was 5. But I need to find common denominators, and I need to change this fraction that is a mixed number into a fraction greater than 1. Starting there, I know 6 times 4 is 24, plus 3 is 27. I know my fraction greater than 1 is 27/4. I also know that my whole number, in order to create it into a fraction, I need to put a 1 under it, so that doesn't change the value. Next step, I need to identify my denominators, which are 4 and 1. And then I need to find a common denominator. Now, 1 is the easiest multiple ever to count up by. 1, 2, 3, 4. We see that 4 and 4 are a match as our common denominators. Next step, we need to find an equivalent fraction, or we need to make equivalent fractions to each other that have a denominator of 4. Now, lucky us, 27/4 has a denominator of 4, so we don't need to transform it into an equivalent fraction. However, we do need to transform our 5/1 into an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 4. Now, I know that 1 times 4 is 4, but if you didn't know that, you could count up your multiples, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you would see that 4 groups of 1 equal 4. Again, you need to multiply the top by the bottom. So you need to multiply 5 by 20, or 5 by 4, which gives you 20. Your equivalent fraction is 20/4. And our next step is to actually do the subtraction problem. The subtraction problem is 27/4 minus 20/4. Now, because I'm doing this virtually on PowerPoint, I'm going to be showing you with a yellow little sticky tab. This is what we would usually do in class. We would put a sticky note over our multiples in order to organize our work. We would subtract the two numerators, the 27 and the 20, and that would give us a numerator of 7. Now, some 5th graders might think that the answer to our problem is 7. Remember, our denominator is 4, and you can't forget about the denominator anytime you're subtracting fractions. So actually, our difference is 7/4. In our class, though, we know that if the numerator is greater than the denominator, you have to divide, divide, divide. When we divide 7 by 4, we can create our mixed number. Now, in remembering our division process, we know that first step is to divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. We're going to see how many groups of 4 we can take away from 7. Now, we know that one group of 4 can be taken away from 7. Next step is multiply. 4 times 1 is 4. Next step, subtract. 7 minus 4 is 3. And then your next step, immediately put your 4 as the denominator. You know your divisor is your denominator. And whatever you have left is your numerator. That gives us a fraction of 1 3/4. However, this 1 3/4 means nothing unless you look back to the problem and see what you're answering. So the question was, what is the difference in miles between the students who live closest and furthest away? In our bottom box, we're going to be answering our question. There is 1 3/4 miles difference between the shortest and the longest distances between students. As I said before, we didn't just go over the basics of line plots, we actually had to apply knowledge that we learned previously with fractions in order to interpret the data on a line plot. So a lot of these problems with line plots, with coordinate planes, they're kind of synthesizing everything that we've learned previously with different mathematical concepts and kind of putting it all into one and applying it with graphing. So if that was a little bit confusing for you, I encourage you to watch this video again. If you have any questions, please talk to me in class so I can help you. And I can't wait to see you guys tomorrow. Have a wonderful night.